I'm Laura. I am the Director of Communications at Auto Trader. It's fair to say I think electric vehicles is a major part of my job and the team's job. And obviously has been since previous governments made some slightly big announcements. It's that kind of theme of the government announcements that we thought we would pick up on this first panel. Ian talked about the impact of Rishi's recent announcement on consumer interest on consumer buying behaviour. I think it's fair to say that the date change, I think, as Ian said, I think it's made very little difference to anybody actively considering today, right now, to buy an EV. Both new and used demand actually is very strong on the marketplace. I think all that it's served to do with consumers is actually anybody that was on the fence, I think the feeling is that they're just going to wait, that they're going to kick the can down the road, which is obviously extremely frustrating, I think, for everybody in this room, because obviously everyone here is vested interest in trying to further the adoption of electric vehicles. So I think what we all need to do, as Aid said, is think about actually trying to address some of the issues that consumers have. My view, I think, when consumers are saying, maybe they're not ready, they're never going to buy an EV, I don't know. I just think you kind of get to the point, maybe people say that now, but I think, we can't kind of truly believe that that's going to be the reality. I think, as soon as chargers are more visible, prices come down, I think, we certainly, I think, will be able to persuade more people into driving electric cars. So, the first panel, we are going to talk about the date change, the 2030 to 2035 date change. We've got a fab panel that I will invite up onto the stage. So we can hear from different perspectives around the industry as to whether actually people feel that the ban, that this date change is actually going to have any kind of impact on what we're all doing. Lauren Palmer, the Programme Director at the Green Finance Institute. We have many Martins. So we have Martin Miller, founder of EV Experts, retailer. We have Martin Schaefer-Barthold, who is a ULEV Programme Officer at Solihull Borough Council. And last but not least, we have Nick Thomas, Marketing Director at Nissan. So I will be doing Martin M and Martin S for today. Ian talked about it. The ZEV mandate is still in place. So the industry, as we talked about, products, the industry has been very kind of geared towards this delivery. That hasn't changed, but maybe if we could just hear from everybody as to whether the date change actually is going to have any implication on what any of you and your businesses are doing. So, would you like to?
Yeah, absolutely. We believe that the kicking the can down the road will impact consumer demand, but it's only those that were on the fence anyway. Our actual sales of used cars in September were absolutely on target, made very little difference whatsoever, as the data showed. Those that are in the market will continue to buy.
As your data showed, what it's led to is a bit of consumer uncertainty and confusion, certainly in the short term. Those in the know obviously have seen the ZEV mandate and realise that actually underneath that headline announcement, nothing has changed. And from a manufacturer perspective, I suspect nothing really will change. From an investor perspective, I think what they're looking at now, particularly in terms of charging infrastructure, is actually it might now take longer for them to get the return on investment than they were expecting because the adoption may be slower. So there's a little bit of uncertainty there that I think may confuse or hold back some investment in the short term. But I think we'll wait to see. I think the other thing actually is there's probably an expectation that Labour might well reverse the ban if they get into power in the next election. So I think, again, people are on the fence waiting to see what happens.
Yeah, I guess from a local authority point of view, the sort of two things that we had to think about when the announcement was made, and I was bombarded with emails immediately from councillors, parish councillors, directors within the council and members of the public, all asking the same question: what does this mean? Do we need to panic? Do we need to completely rewrite our strategy? And I guess the response I gave then is probably exactly the same as the response now, having had more time to consider it. And actually from what we're doing as a local authority, it doesn't really make any difference at all. So we've got a 2030 target for replacing all of the council's vehicles and all the vehicles that are going to be operated by the principal contractors to the local authority. They all need to be zero emission by 2030 because we've got a net zero 2030 council operation target. So it makes no difference for our own vehicles or those for the people that are providing services to us. From an infrastructure point of view, obviously we've got a massive influencing role to play in delivering public charging infrastructure. And it doesn't really make much difference to that either. The ZEV mandate is going to dictate the sort of scale of rollout of charging infrastructure as well as the availability of the people that can actually install that infrastructure. So changing that date from 2030 to 2035 with the ZEV mandate still being there, you're kind of within the error margin for what you would need by the time we get to 2030 anyway. So in practice, for Solihull and for other local authorities, really very little difference at all.
I think finally from the OEM point of view, it doesn't change our plans, it doesn't change the targets we have to abide by as well. But actually it's not the targets that are driving us, it's our desire to be part of that change. We've made our plans very public at Nissan in terms of, our CEO announced several weeks ago we will not launch another ICE car. We'll be pure EV long before 2030. We're very committed to that pathline. It probably makes it harder for us to achieve that because there is a level of uncertainty. The level of uncertainty doesn't help consumers make the right choices for them, and it certainly potentially has some impacts on the investments that we need to happen in charging infrastructure and everything else that goes with that in order for consumers to be confident to make the right choice. We're not seeing an immediate impact on the market, which is great, but I'm sure longer term that middle majority that we need to come on board, that will be more difficult for them to make the right choices. So we collectively have a job to do to remove all of that FUD as much as we can.
Yeah. We did some research actually, so after the ban date was shifted, not only did we obviously talk to consumers, Ian shared a lot of that research, but actually we talked to retailers. And Martin, as a retailer, you're definitely not in these numbers, but many aren't aware of the ZEV mandate. And actually, many didn't know that it had changed. Now, I guess we also know that over half, of the customers that we'd surveyed, and this is actually earlier in the summer, they'd not sold an EV. So I think, there's a lot of work. We talk a lot about, how we kind of accelerate consumer adoption, but I think to get retailers on board and to help educate, that's going to be as important. We need both parties to kind of be driving towards, the same things. So I think, with that in mind, do you think perhaps manufacturers or maybe just broader, the industry are helping retailers enough to make this transition?
I think the most important thing is to not think of EV versus ICE. You can have both cars on the same street. It doesn't need to be a battle. It doesn't need to be a social media. I'm an EV person, therefore I don't like fast petrol cars. There's a confession for you. But the point is that there will be retailers out there who, for whatever reason, wish to sell ICE cars, and good luck to them. And there are people like us that don't and only sell EVs. But then the majority of the market will have to start stocking EVs. And there are minor little things we do that everyone else has got to do, which is all customer-facing members of the team have to drive an EV. It's not difficult, but you can't sell something you've not experienced. So I think there's changes that can come quite quickly.
Yeah, I mean, from a Nissan perspective, we think it's a great advantage that our dealers have been selling EVs for more than 10 years, and they're very familiar with them and they're very comfortable with them. But from an industry point of view, I remember my very first job in sales, I was taught the traditional view of sales is you sell what you've got and you make people buy it. And I was taught very clearly, my job was to understand the customer's needs and to find which of my products best met those needs. And EV now is just part of the portfolio. It will become an increasing part of the portfolio that will match an increasing range of the customer's needs. With the ranges we deliver now, with the reliability we deliver now, with the convenience that we deliver now for most people, and the affordability, then it becomes a no-brainer for an awful lot of customers. And our job is just to explain that to the customers, to explain that through our retailers, but also most people don't do their product research through us or through a dealer. They turn up in a dealer when they're ready to buy a car. They do their product research through Auto Trader, through CarWow, through all of the media, etc. I wish we were the trusted source of information, but we're not. So what I try to do is to work with all of the media partners to get the right information out there for customers to make an informed choice.
Does anyone else want to pip in on that one? No. Yep.
Obviously, I'm kind of the face of EV for Solihull, so we've got an external email address.
Do you get a badge?
I don't get a badge, no. I've got an email address that comes directly to me from members of the public, though, so I do get a lot of just random, weird and wonderful questions. And the one bit of feedback that I do get from a lot of customers, particularly the ones that have just ordered an EV, is that the dealership that sold them the car has given them no information at all about how to actually operate this thing in the real world. They might have told them how to turn it on and where the charging cable is. That's about it. So I think as retailers, you need to get better at providing the right sort of information. And I'm excluding you from this because obviously you guys do that very well.
But we don't do it well enough, I agree.
Yeah, so, I mean, that provision of information and helping them to understand what the journey in an EV, as in the ownership journey in an EV, is actually going to look like in practice. Because I've lost count of the number of people that have contacted me and said, I've ordered an EV, I haven't got a driveway, I don't know where to charge it, can you help? It's like, well, okay, that's great, I can provide advice to 10 people. When that becomes 1,000 people, that's going to be a bit of an issue. So we need to make sure that information provided at the point of sale much better.
Yeah.
I think that is true, actually, because we did a survey of dealers, and one of the things they said was they need more information on things like how much it costs to charge, on where charging is, and actually, what charge points people need. So I think some of them, in the defence of some dealers, do actually just want more information and need that in order to be able to help customers. Having said that, I sat in a dealership recently for a day while my car was being repaired and listened to them selling cars to people, and not once did they sort of try and talk anyone into an electric vehicle that was in the showroom. It was, yep, to your point, we've got these ones here at the front, that's what you want, which is a shame.
I think if I can just come back on your point, Martin S. It's a really valid point, but there's also a role that we in this room have to play in terms of making it simpler to own and operate an EV. I drive an EV, I drove to my mother-in-law's in Birmingham, and I had to register for another new account, for another new charging provider. And we need to cooperate better, and we need to provide better tools to make it simpler for people to, I've got £10 in so many different charging accounts. It shouldn't have to be that way, and we have to figure out how to cooperate better to make a better experience for people as well.
I think David's very clear that they understand that there's a big issue with a lot of misinformation. It's in their policy documents that communication, that myth busting, if you like, needs to be addressed. What can government do you think?
It's a good question. Obviously, they had to go ultra low a few years ago and close that scheme down, which was a shame. I think, though, the reality is that people, if they're looking to switch to an EV, aren't going to go to a government source to find that trusted information. They're going to go to Auto Trader and the other platforms that are available, I'm sure. But so I think they've got a role to support some of that in the background. But actually, I don't think that's where... And they do put out lots of myth-busting documents, but I don't think that's where the general public will go for advice.
No. I think for me, the going back to the charging point and trying to enforce some kind of regulation actually that standardises. And I know that there's been the new charging legislation that has just passed, but it doesn't actually go far enough if you dig into the detail. You're still going to come across the issues that you've got today. And I think, for me, a central point, if we can get that right, if we can improve things, that consumers can go from borough to borough, charge point to charge point, and have a seamless, easy experience, then surely more consumers are going to go, oh yeah, okay, I can do this, I can try that, I've got more confidence. Still onto the government, we've called on the government to look at bundling specifically, because clearly EVs are expensive. There are other things, other considerations that you need to buy when you get an EV. Insurance is like a key, and obviously at the moment, ever more expensive part of the kind of cost equation. What do you think, Lauren? Maybe I'll come to you. Do you think that there's a place actually to try and to look at bundling to see if we can get some more sort of centralised control?
Yeah, I think from a consumer's perspective, what they want is simplicity of the customer journey. So actually, if they can get everything in one place at point of sale, so insurance, a charge point, the car itself, the car finance, into one agreement, then that feels like a simple way for a consumer to access an EV. What stops that happening, certainly from a finance provider's perspective, is certain parts of the Consumer Credit Act and the regulations that are in that. So that makes that difficult. So, for example, at the moment under the CCA, you can return your car within a certain number of days if you're not happy with it, or you can return cancel the finance agreement. If you've got a charge point stuck to the side of your house as part of that agreement, how can you hand that back within your 14 days? So there's some sort of odd complexities within that need reform for that to be able to happen in a way that the finance company can deal with it on a single piece of paperwork. So there's workarounds that people are doing. So I think that will certainly help, but I think there's other things as well that will help to shift the dial. So things like more used leasing, maybe used subscription, the creation of a sort of subscription model where perhaps the battery has a guaranteed value at the end of its life because, the car's never going to be worth nothing. So I think there's and more salary sacrifice on, I think, used EVs as well, and how we can bring that into more people. So I think there's, bundling will help, but there's more we can do as well.
Martin, too.
I personally think bundling isn't necessarily a solution, because a consumer's got to go on a long journey in 20 minutes to decide to buy an EV, and then if you put other things like insurance and charge points on it, it gives them another reason to go and, that's just too complicated. Do you know what, I'm actually just going to buy the car with petrol that I can just fill up down the road. And so in many ways I think it's about making the customer fall in love with the product, the EV itself, because once they do, and we know once a customer's come back from a 30-minute test drive, the closure rate is amazing, because they've experienced it, they've worked it out. Then they go, the insurance is probably going to be a bit more, but I really love the car, and I've got to get a charger. Do you know anyone who can do that? Of course we do. And it's that sort of, we think it's that way. Make the car the hero, and then the consumer will choose it.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to come on that point?
I think there is a lot to be said for making it as simple as possible. But I think you're right, Martin. I think trying to bundle everything together might be a bit too much of a stretch, because there's some things that just will never neatly bundle together, both from a financial point of view and from a practicalities point of view. So if you've bundled your insurance with your car, actually you might be able to get a better deal by bundling your car insurance with your home insurance. So it's making it as easy as possible without tying people into too many things bundled together. I do think bundling the car with the charge point has proved really popular. So I've spoken to lots of people, both in the industry and people local to me, and people within Solihull from a sort of consumer and constituent point of view. And everybody says it's just so much easier when somebody just sorts out that home charger installation when they've ordered the car, because otherwise they don't really know where to go. They don't know who to talk to, and they don't know whether installer A is better than installer B. They've got no way of testing that because they don't know enough people that have had these things installed so far. At least you've got the assurance, if you've done that through the car purchase, that you're not going to get a cowboy coming and fitting something expensive and potentially dangerous to the side of your house.
I think we've got a few minutes if we want to open up, if anyone's got any questions. We've got a few roving mics. I can just about see faces. Has anybody got any questions that they'd like to put to any of the panellists? Oh, yeah, got one over there. Sorry, it's very dark.
Thank you, Andrew Westcott. I'm interested, there's a lot of talk about what government can do, but government notoriously is quite bad at delivery. It's good at kind of setting targets and moving them and shifting them back and around. But I just wonder with something particularly on the infrastructure side, which, you know, this is nationally significant infrastructure. It's delivered in slightly different ways, but it's still nationally significant. It's about making a shift. I just wonder maybe on this point whether we stop thinking about what government can do and more about what industry as a wider kind of collective should do here in terms of kind of helping to deliver. We all know, you know, early adopters in EV have been the people who have been able to charge at home. Not everyone can do that, particularly if you live in a kind of urban environment. So I just really wonder what the kind of panel view on the government getting out of the way and kind of handing it over to industry now.
Has a clear role to play in setting an agenda, setting a direction. I also think you're right that industry and employers especially have a role to play. I usually tell the story of the convenience of an EV. I wake up every morning and my car is charged outside my house. That's a complete lie because I actually charge at work because my employer provides loads of charge points in our work car park and extremely cheap electricity for me. So that's brilliant for me. I told everybody on Friday it was free. It probably is. I don't actually know. I'll probably pay for it somewhere down the line. But you know, the point is, it's about convenience. It's about simplicity. It's about incorporating that into people's daily lives. You know, fast charging is brilliant and plays a really, really important role. But actually, what I want is charging when I'm doing something else. When I'm at work, I'd like to say I go to the gym. That's also a lie. But, you know, when I'm doing something else, I want the charging to be done, and I don't have to worry about it. And if you don't have the convenience of charging at home, it needs to be incorporated in your life. And I think government has a role to mandate that. That every car park of a certain size, every employer of a certain size should have to install charging to make it more convenient and for people.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I think making it too prescriptive, I think to your point on delivery, is where they start to get in the way. But actually where they can unlock things is like things like, you know, working with local authorities on cross-pavement charging solutions and planning permits and, you know, access to helping to reform access to the grid and network upgrades and things like that. So that's where I think they should be playing a role, not on necessarily saying, right, we need this number of charge points in the ground by this date, because actually I think that's where the market can sort of solve itself.
They can untangle red tape, right? And we know that that's an issue, that slowed a lot of people down, it slows investment down, it slows infrastructure down. I think one thing that we're specifically supporting OZEV with at the moment is looking at some of the regulation around the grants for chargers for people that live in flats. The criteria at the moment isn't terribly helpful because you've got to have the car before you can then apply for a charger to go on, you know, around the premises. But we know from a consumer journey perspective, that's kind of the wrong way round. You know, people need to know that they've got somewhere to charge, that they're not going to have to wait. You know, that there's sort of that ambiguity around it. So I definitely think we industry should help government, and I think kind of vice versa. And I think industry definitely has got a big role to play as well. But I think it's just each other just trying to help, I think.
I think just coming back on the point you made actually about working with OZEV, I think that's the point we are doing with government. So I know Auto Trader, us at the GFI, other various organisations are working with OZEV, so they've set up a series of working groups to look specifically at how we can scale the used EV market. Mm-hmm. So they're engaging with industry, which I think the right way to do it.
Yeah. I think one of the other things government needs to do, which is resolve VAT on electricity. Right, it's a big thing. I know Quentin's here today, and he's certainly leading that, and that's great. But also road tax. It's really weird. People buy a £40,000 car and they worry about £125 a year road tax. I mean, honestly, they do. And because it's just a really horrible, nasty thing to have to pay, right? So just let's have some clarity there. And yes, there's a bigger conversation of where is all this revenue going to come from? Absolutely. But that is something that only government can mandate and give direction. And yeah, we need that tax strategy set out, which I know is always a difficult thing for any government to predict the future, but they need to do that because that will genuinely give much more consumer confidence and help them save £100 a year, and that makes it all suddenly have that car over that car. And please get rid of the VAT on electricity.
I think we've got time for one more question. Just over there at the back. Thank you.
Thanks. Dan Munford, Insight Research. What role do you think how important, rather, do you think the role of the roadside retail industry is in providing on-the-go charging? And by roadside retail, I mean in the old money, if you like, gas stations, petrol stations.
Good question.
Question. I tried to reach out to forecourt operators across Solihull last year, and I think I had 2 responses, which, as far as consultations go, is pretty poor, regardless of how many people you ask. 2 responses is quite poor. So I think there is a lot of uncertainty amongst those sort of forecourt operators of conventional fuelling forecourts around exactly what they're going to do and when they're going to do it. From having separate conversations outside of that formal consultation exercise, I know that actually some of those forecourt operators absolutely have plans to maintain those operations and over time replace the petrol and diesel pumps with ultra-rapid EV charging and maintain the sort of retail element of it. That clearly won't work in all circumstances. So I've got a friend who operates a small local garage, and his view is that he'll operate that as a petrol and diesel-led garage, probably won't ever put any EV charging in there, and it will just shut when he retires. So, yeah, there's a real mixed bag. I think there'll be fewer petrol-type forecourt experiences in the future because you won't need them, because most EV charging will be done at home, right? That's the most sensible place to do it. It's the cheapest, easiest place to do it. There will still be the need for transit charging, but it won't be at the same volumes, and it'll be a different experience because that dwell time that you spend there will be a little bit longer. I know batteries are continuing to get better and the charging times will come down, but the experience will need to be a little bit different. You'll need something a bit more sort of 5 or 10 minute experience plus, rather than in and out in 2 or 3 minutes as you can do at the minute.
I think it's back to the point that Nick made earlier. You know, you want to be doing something, don't you, like going to the gym or shopping while you're charging. You won't necessarily be pulling into a fueling station. Having said that, you know, petrol and diesel cars will be around on the road beyond 2050. So those petrol and diesel stations are going to exist for a long while to come. But given Shell are here later, it's probably a question to re-ask them.
Yeah.
I would just add that for me, what's critical is destination charging. Highway charging is growing at fast pace. That's really great. That's critical for the longer journeys. But what I actually want is certainty that when I get to my destination and I'm doing something else, I can plug my car in the car park or at the hotel or at the office or wherever I am, and then I can return to a fully charged car rather than needing to worry about finding somewhere or sitting in a fuel station for half an hour, filling up my car. That's not what I want to be doing. It's destination charging, which is critical.
I was going to say visibility. I think if consumers can see, you know, the chargers, whether they're on trunk roads, motorways, you know, in their villages, I think as long as consumers can see them, and you know, and as Nick said, that they're free, that they're going to work, I think that, you know, that's a big thing. I think that's what, you know, if I owned a petrol station today, I would, you know, and you can actually get the electricity in, because we know that, you know, they can't. So actually, it's not going to be a straight swap for swap. But then, you know, the brilliant EV super hubs, you know, a couple of which are like within a few miles of where we are at the moment. You know, people will just go to those. You know, it's a different off on the motorway, isn't it, to maybe where you were used to going. So.
I think one of the nicest things about owning an EV is that you never have to visit a petrol station, because they're not the best place to hang out, are they? So
They're not the greatest.
It's not somewhere I miss. Yeah.
We've run out of time. The timer is flashing at me. But thank you very much. That was great. Thank you.